Welcome to Savvy Stewardship with Tim Kaiser. On today's episode, we're going to talk about marriage and money. The statistics are pretty brutal. It says about 40% of divorces end because of marital conflict, and it's the number one cause of just general arguments and fights in marriages. And so today I have a person who's been married for over 3 decades, and it's my wife, and I know her best when it comes to monetary and marital issues. And so this should be a fantastic interview, and we're going to pick her brain from a wife's perspective on money issues. So, Dawn, could you please take a moment and introduce yourself?
I am Dawn Kaiser, and I'm excited to be here because, marriage and money is huge. It's just something that is a constant pull on families or blessing on families, and so it's such an important facet. So yes, let's get into it.
All right. So, and one of the things that with pillars of savvy stewardship is we believe, first of all, money has to be earned. Then once it's earned, it can be spent, it can be saved, it can be invested, it can be used to pay down debt, it can be used to be given charitably.
Mhm.
And so all those areas really do affect marriages, and it's important. Unity in marriage financially is super important. And so let's talk about a few of those things. So marriages often, God's sense of humor, opposites attract, so it makes it really challenging. So you
Yeah.
may have two different perspectives, which both of them are important, because if you had it all one way, you could go into one ditch. Have it all the other way, you could go into another ditch.
Mhm.
So let's go with the beginning. Let's start talking about earning capacity, earning money.
Sure.
And one of the decisions a family has to make early on the earning side is, will there be a two income family or one income family? And
Mhm.
you've been in both of those. You've been on both sides of that equation. So share some of your wisdom on some of the thought process. If you were talking to, say, like a young wife and mother, what are some of the thought processes that you would want to give to somebody, from your experience and wisdom?
Sure. I think that one of the biggest things I would want to share is, what is your purpose? What is the biggest purpose that's your God given purpose as perhaps a wife or as a mom? Is it to be a, two income family, and bring in the finances because you need to, because you're in a place that you absolutely have to bring in some more money and you're looking at it from that perspective? Or is it that you feel very driven and called to be at home to support the family, work, in all the ways that you can to support, your kids and your husband and be available there, making wise choices when it comes to spending, when it comes to grocery shopping, when it comes to, what you're doing there. I mean, the income can matter greatly. It also can be that you're spending more money if you are working because you have childcare to consider. You know, we were very blessed. We had such great care. It was one of those situations where we, early on I chose to stay home with the kiddos, and the finances were tight. Did a few odd jobs here and there, and then did end up pursuing a degree and a career in teaching. So then I was out in the home doing the two income thing, which was a blessing as well. And then came back, scaled it back, and did came back from the professional realm back into the home, for teenage years of our youngest. So both of those places hit our finances in different ways, and we were in different positions at the time. My advice would be to weigh it out. Can you afford childcare? If you are a two income family, are you putting the cost in the expenses there for your time out of the home? Is it worth it to you for the strain and the stress that it can bring you when everybody's exhausted and home? And so what is your purpose? What are you as a family united And it has to be a husband and wife thing, right?
Does, yeah.
Like that's not something you do on your own. Has to, that's a united front type thing. Can we do it?
Yeah. And we were super fortunate. So when you were, before you were teaching, you were working at a church. You were working
Mhm.
as a finance director at a church. And I was working and you were working. And we were fortunate there. And everyone has this um, ability. We had, at one point, had one of the kids' aunt watching our kids. And
Mhm.
she was a stay-at-home mom. And so we actually was able to bless her financially and have someone caring for our children that we trusted fully. And then for a season, we had someone from our church that was a good church friend, and same thing. She was a stay-at-home mom with her youngest, or her one of her kids was the same age of one of ours, and so that person actually watched our kids. And again, we were helping them, they were helping us. It was a kind of a symbiotic type relationship. And some people can do that, have grandmas around or aunts around. That's fantastic,
Yeah.
because there are times, and I would say us at that time, we really, every dollar mattered. Every dollar
Yes, it
mattered.
did.
So you can have it, and I think the whole idea behind doing like a cost benefit analysis on daycare. I mean, I know somebody right now it's paying $3,000 a year, $3,000 a month on daycare,
Mm.
and so by the time you figure out how much you're actually getting paid from your job, it's probably not that much, because you still got to pay Uncle Sam, and you got to pay for gas, and you got to pay for the things you need at work. And but when we were at that point, every dollar mattered, because we were basically at a negative negative budget. So there are sometimes very tough trade-offs that a family has to make, and right? I
That's
mean,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. And we made that call together. We decided that it was best at that time for, me to go to work and do the full-time work, the full-time job. And it did help tremendously. It was a big help for the season that we were in. It was a financial help at that time, but we did have some, um, other steps along the way that kind of propelled us even farther. And, it a blessing to be able to not be in that position as well.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. So that's the earning capacity, and then let's say you are a stay-at-home mom. Okay,
Mhm.
you made that decision. You're a stay-at-home mom, and you believe you're called, and I believe there's plenty of biblical scriptures to support that idea. And then they'll say the husband is the sole breadwinner.
Mhm.
How can, and this goes to a Proverbs 31 idea. How can how can a wife support her husband in the marketplace, so
Mhm.
he is the best he can be and is earning money? Because we shouldn't feel bad about requiring salaries when we're getting what we're worth. And so
Right.
how can a wife be a blessing to her husband and help him, encourage him, or whatever case, from a wife's perspective? What do you think?
Sure. So, I mean, I think from a wife's perspective, when your husband comes home, it's a matter of supporting and honoring and respecting, raising your kids in a way where they're showing, look at how hard, dad is working to be able to provide things. And we're so grateful that God is using him in that way. So supporting your husband and what he's doing, his endeavor with your kids as well. And if you don't have children, then you get that call. You decide, what are you doing? Are you staying home with kids in the house or not? That's okay. That's a unified decision, but support your husband in his growth endeavors, building him up when he comes home, but not lying to him, but being, honoring him and
Sure.
noticing those things, and also asking God to help you see those things that he needs. And that just really give him honor and build him up and, show you appreciation and thankfulness. Realizing that when he comes in the door, he's getting rid of, a lot of expectations from the job. He may be coming in kind of beat down by the job as well. That's something that, is a challenge of a wife to be able to have their home, be a place that is a place of refuge and a place that encourages growth and continues to look for the hope in front. But that is a unified front too. That's part of it, is looking for that hope and seeing into that. So I would encourage a wife to just, one, seek the Lord on ways to um, be there for your spouse. Also, if your husband is wanting to advance on the job and needs some extra training and some extra time, being okay. And we did this, being okay with the extra hours of study and the extra hours of, hey, I'm looking to do this for our family. So, as a couple, when you're saying the husband is like, I'm looking to do this for our family, grow in this area for our finances, then supporting him in that and not saying, man, you're never available or you're not doing this. Now, there is a balance.
Sure.
So, that's important. And understanding that there might be times to speak up and pray about that and ask the Lord to give you a voice to be able to speak up and say, I really do miss you. Is there time that you can, schedule that's set apart here? And that's okay to do that because, you're important to your husband and he's important to you. But being available and making sure that you're not trying to complain and take away from what your husband's trying to do, which is provide. And so sometimes that's extra time. And, that we did that. We did that for quite a few years. It was you got to put in some extra schooling and you've got to do some of those classes. And it did pay off.
Mhm.
And in the meantime, by the grace of God, we were still able to have a very close marriage. And I attest that to the Lord helping both of us.
Yeah, and there's a in the scripture that says husbands love your wives and wives respect your husbands, right? What Paul was writing into the book of Ephesians. And we often have two different ways of showing our
Mhm.
affection. And men, for the most part, this is broad brush talking here, but men, for the most part, we're about conquering and providing, and that's the way we express our love often. And sometimes that can be a challenge because, like what you said, we've done this, and you'd mentioned it. There was a season where I was leaving for work at like 3:30 in the morning and getting home at 8 o'clock at night, and we did that for almost
Yeah.
10 months. And then you're not much good on the weekends either because you're exhausted and you do it all over again.
Mhm.
And then what we've been able to do recently, sometimes if I'm traveling for work and your schedule's free, that you just come along, right? And you meet some of my work
Mhm.
people, you kind of see what I do. And if anything, we get to be in the same room in the evenings, right, and have some dinners together. But try to do those kind of things, and yeah, and I don't want people to think who are listening to this think, oh, he's just one siding this. Well, I'm interviewing a wife right now, so she can't speak for the husband side. I'm not going to be you know, say my side yet. It's really important to do that, and sometimes you have to clock a lot of hours, and I think
Mhm.
that's a tough thing. Is like you said, not to understand the balance. So men, we do have to balance that, and yes, the whole conquering and providing is important to us, but it can't be to the detriment of our relationships with our wife and kids.
That's right.
And the old school of dad's got home from work, yeah, leave him alone. That we shouldn't do that. The kid should be able to jump in the lap of the dad, even if he's exhausted, and he
Yes.
should be okay with that. So that's a balance there. So
Yeah.
that's that part. So, and it's really important. I'll speak from a man's perspective on needing your wife's support, and it's really important. Men need this, and the joke sometimes is fragile egos of men, and it's a terrible joke, and wives should stop doing it. But they should be able to speak the truth in love to their husbands. And there are times when a man may be experiencing a really tough situation where the job's just not going the way he thought it was. We
Mhm.
don't need to kick a man while he's down, but let's say if you're in the just you think you're skilled in an area and no one else does, and your wife knows you the best, sometimes it's time to listen to that advice too, maybe pivot. But
Mhm.
that support is super important, and the ability to speak honestly into someone's life is vital.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of the things that I think is that we've learned through the years is that, you know, when one of us advances, the other is advancing. I
Yeah.
mean, it takes both of us to do that. So, in the husband cherishing, the wife and Tim, you cherishing me and me honoring you, we're advancing both of us to be more productive, to do whatever it is that the Lord has put in our hands to do. And one of the things is to be a worker worthy of his wage, right?
Yeah.
And being able to be positioned to steward the finances well and to make sure that our household is run well and pleasing to the Lord. It's not easy. It's not always easy. We're not always, as united as we'd like to be, but we're definitely repentant, and then we get up and we keep
Yeah.
going. So,
Yeah. And hard work is a Christian value.
mm,
And I think sometimes this is Dawn gets my financial frenzies usually unfiltered. So she hears all the crazy stuff. She helps me kind of soften it sometimes. But I think some Christians are
mm,
holding out for the quote unquote favor of God or the blessing of God and refuse to roll up their sleeves and work. Where the example we are set by God and Jesus. God worked 6 days, rested the seventh
mm,
day. And then Jesus was always up usually all night long praying and then working while it was still day according to the Gospel of John. And then the one time he actually we know for sure he was sleeping. It was in the middle of a hurricane basically, and he
yeah,
was so exhausted
yeah,
he had to, and he still had to get up. So I mean the examples set by Jesus and God are hard working to the
mhm,
point of exhaustion. And
mhm,
I know there's a work life balance, but most of us are pretty far from that
mhm,
exhaustion stage. But okay, so that's an earning thing. Let's go into something else. Let's talk about spending,
mhm.
and because that's another thing too. And in the book I just wrote, the savvy stewardship, the scrutinized spending is one of the categories we talk about. So let's talk about budgeting, the
Oof.
importance of budgeting for a couple. And so we've been through this, and again, we're not trying to put us as the shining example. This is what we know because we've lived it for over 3 decades. But we've budgeted when the budget was negative, and
Mm.
you had to make trade-offs of what got paid and what got bought, and we've also had it to the point where it's not a negative budget, and God's, the blessing of God is there, and you still have to be a steward either way. So share some of your wisdom again, maybe if you want to go from a young wife and mother that when life was tough and the frustration, or but the importance even budgeting when money is not so tight.
Sure. So the interesting thing about a budget when we first started out, I don't think I even really knew what a budget was. I think it just felt just foreign to me because I wasn't raised utilizing a budget. I didn't really, I heard the word in school. I'm sure a little bit, um, but I had no working knowledge of what a budget was and how um, valuable and freeing it could be. At the same time, it can also be, a little bit stressful and binding when it's not done well. And I think, um, and I'm sure you can kind of help me out here. I think, in my perspective, I think we've done it both ways. That we've had seasons of it done really well, and seasons of it, where we were kind of not really doing it. But I think the importance of a budget, so first starting out, we just didn't have the money to pay for things. We
Right.
were very low income. We just didn't have enough. And in our head at that point, it was, we're just eking by. We didn't know anything about it. That's something we kind of grew into. And, Tim spearheaded that. So it became something that you introduced to me. And so when that was first introduced to me, it was a challenge to say, okay, what are we doing here? How are we going to do this? But it was a good challenge, and we did. It was like challenge accepted. We did it. We did it. It was challenge for both of us. Part of it was because you're looking and you're saying, how can we increase? Because we need more, income in order to get our spending lined up correctly because we owed a few things. We had some
Yeah.
things we needed to take care of.
Yeah, we did.
And we were both a part of that. So it
Hmm.
was kind of it was something we did, and we both we got to learn to work on how to get through it. And I would say that budgeting is, at the beginning it became something that was exciting because we got to watch some things happen. We got to be involved in it. Our meetings over the budget were challenging because we're different. So, what we saw as important, the other person didn't see it as important. Um, I am a little bit, more short sighted, I would say, than you are, Tim. And so some of my planning was all at this is what's going on here. And Tim was a good thinking ahead to the future and where we're going and what's, important there. So we found that was where our work was in figuring out how are we going to balance those, and those can be strengths for both of
Yeah.
us, right? How are we going to balance both of that? And once we figured out ways to do that, which took grace, I'm really thankful that Tim was able to hear me, and he listened closely and started to implement some things, and I was able to hear him be able to implement and understand the direction that we were headed. So it brought us, I think budgeting actually helped bring more unity in our marriage because we talked more, we planned more, we knew everything together. There were times where I'm like, how much do we pay for this? And how much, or whatever. And the same thing, our planning and our future stuff, it was kind of done together. So that early budgeting thing, it was fun when we started seeing increase and we started seeing things. Yeah, you remember those days?
I do, and the
So,
hard part is, and I don't want to discourage anybody. That so we designed the budget. I use the joke that we're not Victor Frankenstein creating a monster that's going to turn on us. It's our budget, and the
yeah.
hard part is when you have more outflow than income, it makes it really challenging because you are making trade-offs then. And there are people listening to this, and Don and I have walked through this with other couples and other people over the years as well, coaching and helping people budget. It's never easy. And so those are the most painful when you really had to look in the mirror and say, we just don't make enough money. And then you had to say, do I want to be a victim to this and let it snowball out of control, or say, okay, I don't have enough money this month, but it's going to be a little better, and then the incremental progress,
Mm,
and that makes a difference. And but I would say but you're right on the coming together, because you have to listen to each other. You don't have to, but a healthy relationship you do. And I would encourage anybody to find out what's important, and then those times. I mean, it'd be I think if we would have went from when you and I both were making like $6.50 an hour and working really hard, just what we were
mhm,
doing didn't have that much value to our employers. Nothing personal, just we weren't adding any that kind of value. But at that point, we had to realize, do we want to stay here? And we could. People do, and they keep spending more out of control. But telling yourself no,
mm,
and tightening up the scripture where it says, I'm going to deny myself, pick up my cross, and follow Jesus daily. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, no, we can't do this. And
mhm.
there were years where we didn't go on vacations.
Yeah,
We didn't. And people blessed us. I mean, I remember Casey and Cheryl one time letting us use one of their campers and sending us to the Battle Creek Zoo. And that was, for us, was a
yeah,
vacation, right? And we had a
yeah,
ton of fun.
that's
And
right.
but we just didn't have the money to do it, and we're like, we're not going to do this. We're gonna allow God to work in our hearts and change us. And it happened. And we weren't going out to eat, doing all kinds of stuff, and that's really painful for some people. But if you really, I mean, if you're going to be a steward and working with God and for God and understanding, allowing Him to work in you, then these steps are necessary. So you went from I said the 6.50 an hour, combined $13 an hour, to where we are
Mhm.
today. In a night, it wouldn't have stuck because there was no lessons to learn. And the pain, and you talk about when we were in our house, we worked in Kalamazoo, and we had the house, we had no heat for a couple of days. We couldn't afford
Yeah,
propane, and we
yeah,
stayed there. We sent our daughter to one of our relatives for the weekend, and we're like, this is not going to be us forever.
Right.
And those lessons, you have to walk through those. Joseph didn't go from the pit to the palace. There was a few steps in between there. And I think so if that's you listening today, yeah, it can be really challenging and painful, but understand these things you're in, God's teaching us something. And so don't shortcut it. Pass the test the first time, because until we pass the test, it'll keep reoccurring in our lives.
That's
So so
right.
that's so that's budgeting and spending. Let's talk about saving. On the saving
Yeah.
end, how much, from a wife's perspective, how much security or joy do you feel in having an emergency fund? Is that, you
Wow.
ever think about that, or
Yeah, I do
yeah,
actually. I mean, let's face it, things happen. We have,
mhm.
emergencies come up, furnaces go out. We had a furnace go out and we're, like being able to have money to be able to pay for it is huge.
And I was
Having,
traveling then, wasn't I? I think I was in Vegas. It was 100 degrees, and you were back in Chicago, and it was like 10.
yeah.
Yeah, and our furnace
So,
went out. Yeah,
mm, so yes, having a savings that's earmarked, or emergency savings, that just gives just such a sense of, okay, if something happens, I have this sitting here. We have this sitting here, and there's a plan for it. We know emergencies will happen. We are always surprised by them because they don't happen in,
our
weird.
timing. Yeah,
Yeah, well,
yeah,
nobody wants an emergency. Nobody,
sure.
we want our stuff to last forever. We want things to, just keep going. The reality is that, you have, car situations, you have all kinds I mean, we've been in places where, when we first started out, our car died on us. We didn't have transportation. We didn't have reliable transportation. We got, thank goodness for the church, we had people lend us vehicles, and then, those went out too. But we were not in a place at that time to do it ourselves. We didn't have a savings set up. Now, by, the grace of God, the wisdom of God on being able to, be promoted at work for you and and saving and being wise and following a budget, we have things in place for, emergencies. And, as a wife, it's security. It feels like I'm being valued and heard. And, if anything happens, it's okay because we have the finances there to be able to cover it. I feel like that's something that, most wives want to know, that they have, there's money set aside for the just in case, because
Just in
those things
case.
do
Yeah.
happen.
They do, and it's we redeem from the curse of the law, but the effects of the fall still apply to us. So
Mm,
things break down. Roofs need to be replaced. You mentioned furnaces, cars, all those things happen.
yeah.
People get downsized, right size, lose their job, and sometimes all they have is unemployment. So it's really important. So that's you. If you're working on your emergency fund, I mean, I encourage you to continue to do so. Do what you got to do, and leave it there for for emergencies.
Yeah. Wait, that's
Emergency. Yeah.
important
Yeah. Go ahead.
actually.
Go
The
ahead.
leave it there for emergency. That's important. I think that's something that, we had to work through at the very beginning, because my idea of an emergency was different than your idea of an emergency. So we had to kind of talk through that and get on the same page on what the emergency fund was. And then later we began to develop savings that was specific to maybe vacations or other things.
Yeah. Sinking
So,
funds. Yeah.
yeah. So, knowing and understanding what a true emergency is, and understanding that that money is sitting there for a true emergency. It's not because, um, my purse strap broke and I'm looking to go buy a new purse. You probably, like me, had at least two, or, a way to secure it or do something else in place of that until you got to a place that it was appropriate to go buy that. But an emergency fund is really, truly those big things. And, that's something to talk about and figure out, with your husband, with your wife. so that you're on the same page because it matters.
That's a great point. And then that's something that you probably could do beforehand. And you won't know all the different situations or eventualities, but say pick 5 things, and then maybe have a little talk session and say, okay, what are the 5 things we both agree on that we can, in case of emergency, break glass on this thing. And
Hmm.
so those, it's because it's going to happen. You're going to have emergencies. So
Yeah.
you might as well think through things, or think through things that aren't emergencies, whatever works for your
Hmm.
family. Let's in this last thing, we're going to skip investing because I think we covered a lot of the other stuff. I really want to get to the giving part portion, and we love and promote, practice, inspire,
Yeah.
invite people to radical, lavish, fearless generosity. But that's something that couples need to talk
Mm.
about. So there are some people, some families, some churches, talk about tithing, and they set aside 10% of giving. Some people do something other, and then the sky's the limit how much they give. But being on the same page, husband and wife, to give and where to give and when to give are
Mm.
important. Because as Christians, we should be. Jesus says, Acts 20:35, it's more blessed to give than to receive. So talk about that from a wife's perspective, giving.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's such an honor and a privilege to be married to, a man who loves to give too. That's something that both you and I share. We
Mm-hmm.
we love to give. For the wives and the husbands out there that are working on this and are wanting to get united with that, I think sit down and talk about what are some things you'd love to give into. Where do you want to give? What are you wanting to do with that? How are you wanting to support and promote the kingdom of God? And your community and the people around you, your family, where is it that is your heartbeat at first as an individual for giving and then as a husband and wife? That matters, because then you can get behind it together, share the what ifs. Maybe right now it's a dreaming thing. Wouldn't it be great if we could give? We talked about years ago being able to give way beyond a certain percentage that we had in our head. And we were
Mm-hmm.
like, wouldn't it be great if we could, live on just this small percentage and be able to give this much? And at that time, that was not something that was, really close for us. And, and it's been, a lifetime journey of figuring out how to do that and get there. And it's been
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. It's fun. It's so fun to be able to say, let's do this
Mm-hmm.
and be able to together, um, make plans for it. Also, putting it in your budget. Let's give this much more this year and moving in that direction. There's been times where we've sacrificed in our giving, that we've set some things aside, some things that, were some fun things that we wanted to do that were like just relaxation or, that type of thing. We did, we've through the years set a few things aside and said, let's put that off for a little bit so we can give here. Because there are things that come up that you're like, yeah, we really want to do that. Um, I would encourage, have the talk, be open and willing. Um, Not once do I believe we set aside things that we owed somebody in order to
No,
give.
right. Yeah, no, right.
So we had a standard on that because we believed that, when we gave our word that we were going to do it, then the Lord wanted us to honor it, and so we wanted to pay what we owed. And also, even understanding being able to provide for your family, so making sure your kids have food and you have things. Like there are certain things, standards that we didn't mean that our kids didn't sacrifice in
No, right.
places, because
Exactly.
as a family we chose we're going to give here, and we're going to do this together. And that shows a giving heart, that shows, and that teaches your kids as well.
And now I'm gonna dig a little deeper in that though. So let's talk about this, because a couple different ways you can give and places you can give, and you said things that move your heart. So obviously we're local church people, and
Yeah.
we believe that most of our giving, we'll say, goes to the local church to support the efforts there. But let's say but you can give to family,
Mm.
You can give to your kids. You can give to missionaries or other ministries. You can give to strangers. Jesus, Paul, Peter, they talked about giving to the poor often.
Mhm.
Um, so let's. There was a situation recently where we wanted to give into a certain situation, and you felt a little pause in your heart about giving to this. And this is something that was a great thing to give to.
Yeah.
And but you're like, yeah, I just don't feel like we should do it right now, which for you is unusual because you were a super generous person. And in this situation, the person was on like a timeline. It was,
Mhm.
and then we didn't. And share the rest of that story if you don't mind.
Yeah, yeah. We really truly were, wanting to give. We were going to give into a situation, and and we had planned it, but I did happen to talk with you, and I was like, I just feel like we need to wait on this. I'm just not sure why. I'm not sure why, but I just feel like we need to wait. It was 2 days or 3 days later, I received a phone call from this individual and shared that they had went to discuss a payment plan, a plan of when they were going to pay what they needed. And when they went in, this woman who was there, that was working there, that they were discussing this plan with, said, "Oh, that's great. So that's the date you're going to pay it." Well, there's no need because I already paid it for you. And that to me was so beautiful. And this person that was telling me about this, that we were going to sow some, give financially to, was crying. And I cried because, you know, it was one of those situations where I think the Lord was really speaking to both of us, me, to make sure that I'm listening carefully and not just giving in every situation. There's times when we need to stop and just heed that voice. And also in this other individual, in understanding that God was going to meet them where they were, and he did, and worked through another individual who chose to give
Who
and
gave
paid
them?
it
Yeah,
off.
gave them opportunity to give too. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So, I mean, that's beautiful. And I think that, man, how great would that be if the whole body of Christ did that? Just was willing to listen and obey and give, and had the finances available to give when
Yeah, and
need.
that's a good point too. And I don't want anybody to think that you have to be a certain income level to give, because we don't wait until we're all of our ducks are in a financial row. I one of my favorite quotes is from our son's pastor from college, and he pastors a church in Grove City, Pennsylvania, and in one of his messages he says Christians should live in a lifestyle of deprivation and a world of satiation.
Mm,
That and C.S. Lewis has a similar quote. That's like, how much should you give? If your expenses are the same as people around you and you're a Christian, you're probably not giving enough, whatever
mhm.
that means to you, basically. And so there's a point where we should, or God will allow us to put a damper on our wants, desires will overtake us. It's just
Yeah.
the human nature. But then saying, you know what, God, I want to be your steward. And Jesus in 2 Corinthians, I think at 8-9, says that he became poor so that we through his poverty could be made rich. And that thing, like people get that thing, they pull it out of context. But for 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, both those chapters is Paul talking to the church in Corinth, trying to encourage them to give to an offering for the church in Jerusalem who was going through a drought. And he was using the Macedonian church, which was a poor church, as a provocation to the rich Corinthians to get them to
Mhm.
give. And he's like, here you have God in the flesh, came down from a place that's full of, diamonds and pearls and gold, and lived here on this earth and could have easily built
Mhm.
a financial empire, but he chose to give so much. He basically
Yes.
relatively impoverished himself.
Mm.
And to a certain point we had to do that. Now that line there is between us and God. That's where it's hard. So you can't, as a person, even as a pastor or preacher, put that on somebody else, because then they will give grudgingly or under compulsion. And we want people to give joyfully
Right.
and freely, but you don't have to be rich to do this.
Right.
If you're a shopper at Aldi people that go to buy stuff there, it's like their own little community. And you give someone a card at Aldi, they're going to be happy, and it's a quarter.
Yes.
It's a
Yeah.
quarter. You just give
Yeah.
them the card, or you leave the card unattended, and they get it, and like, wow, this is an awesome
Yeah.
day. It doesn't have to be, $1,000 or $10,000 or $100. It can be anything, and it's just using that muscle, the giving muscle, and
Right.
constantly doing it and practicing, because practice makes permanent.
Yeah. I think that, I love that you brought that up. I mean, giving can be, buying somebody a coffee.
Hmm.
And it could be that they were just wanting to be noticed. So if you're in any kind of a, financial situation that is tough, God can still work through you with the giving. I mean, so being available for that is something that gives you hope. And, I think that it's important to exercise the idea of and just do it. Just ask the Lord to show you ways that you can give and to give you increase your giving. If you're wanting to do that, I mean, there's joy in doing that. And so ask him, be willing to, and pray together as a
Hmm.
couple. Ask the Lord to help you and show you places to give too, because there might be people that you encounter. There might be family members you don't know anything about or neighbors that need, you know, and along with missions or, church organizations and, things that are just needed. It's a blessing to be able to do that. But at the same time, it's not done to be, to get something. I
Right.
think that's important too, is understanding you're not giving so that you can get something back. You're giving out of the abundance of love and grace that God has given you, and you just want to give that to others. And that in itself is a really, really great way to be free, and that finances don't own you, the money doesn't own you, um, and to notice others and to serve others well.
Yeah, and you can't always be the person who is the giver either. And I think if we start, even if you are the person
Mhm.
who has the most money,
Yeah.
because understanding that, see now, and again, not trying to make us the shining example. We can just tell you the stories we know. But there were times when
Mhm.
our first place we lived in was a small trailer in the middle of the country, and we didn't have any money, and our landlord would give us fruits and vegetables in our garden that we would eat, and your sister would bring over groceries for us, so we'd have some
Yes.
food. And when you start receiving like that in humility, it's
Mhm.
easier one day to give graciously, and so
Yeah.
you won't come across as the one who is meeting the need or filling a need. We're simply stewards of God's resources, and we don't want to ever come across in a way of pride or arrogance that we're anybody's source. God is the source, and He's just funneling money through us to somebody else. And so no one wants to feel like they're a charity case or project. So
Right.
you just do it with grace and allow that to happen. And if you're that person and you're on the receiving end,
Mhm.
receive it with gratitude, and then one day just say, you know what, God, I want to be the person who's able to give, and your giving will be cleaner then. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
That's great. It
Does that make
does. It
sense?
makes
Yeah.
complete sense. And I must say, it also is great to, I mean, there's something really beautiful about being able to receive as well. And sometimes it's not because you have a need that someone's giving. Sometimes they just give out of the abundance of love. And so they're giving because they want to.
Hmm.
And that's one of those five love languages is,
Hmm.
gifts,
Hmm.
so I think that's important to see too and experience. So yeah.
Very good. So we're close at time. So if is there anything that you would like to share, from a mom's
Mhm.
perspective, a wife perspective, just a Christian perspective? Doesn't have to be in those two categories that we've not covered, that you think would be that you would want someone to know.
Sure. I think that, I think one of the biggest things is, you know, don't give up. As a wife, understanding your husband can be challenging because men are different than you are. So I think don't give up on it and do your best to understand that, you're working together and put problems and situations, we learned to put it on the other side of the table and to sit side by side and address that problem or that situation, attack that and not each other. So in
Very
our
good.
conversation and in our building of a budget and our working through, with all of those situations, it could be applied to any area with your kids, whatever it is that you're doing. Put that situation on the other side and be united together. So I would encourage you to seek the Lord on ways to do that and on how to continue to honor your husband and honor each other um, as you navigate finances and you build the kingdom with it in stewarding your finances. It's a lot of fun.
Yep. Strong families build strong churches. Strong churches build big, strong communities. And so, thanks for joining me today. So, those of you listening, if you're on the podcast, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and share. And thank you for joining me today. And we'll be back again with another episode. Until then, I dare you to profit so you can practice and promote radical, revolutionary, fearless generosity. Blessings.